What if the reason you have never felt at home in your own mind is not because something is wrong with you, but because your mind was never designed for the world everyone else inhabits? Picture this. While others see a conversation, you see an entire archaeology of meaning, layers upon layers of subtext, intention, and future consequences unfolding simultaneously. You have been called sensitive, intense, too much, yet also distant, cold, unreachable. You have learned to perform normalcy so well that even you sometimes forget you are translating between two languages, theirs and yours. The Sigma INFJ lives in this translation, this exhausting space between worlds, and the question that haunts you, that has perhaps brought you here, is whether this difference has a name. Are you neurodivergent, operating with a fundamentally different cognitive architecture? Or are you simply wired for a depth that our shallow age cannot recognize, let alone accommodate? The answer will not comfort you, but it will finally make you visible to yourself. Picture the cave dweller who emerges not to join the marketplace, but to stand at its edge, watching the patterns others cannot see. The Sigma INFJ occupies this threshold position, neither fully participating in the social world, nor completely withdrawn from it. They are present, but as observers rather than players. They watch, they listen, they absorb, and through this watchfulness, they perceive connections between people, events and meanings that others miss entirely. These insights arrive suddenly, without conscious reasoning, yet the Sigma INFJ feels absolutely certain of their truth. They know, for instance, that a relationship is fracturing before either person admits it. They sense the real meaning beneath someone's careful words. They predict how a situation will unfold with uncanny accuracy, not through logic, but through a form of deep pattern recognition that operates beneath conscious awareness. This knowing feels inexplicable even to them, as though the truth simply arrives fully formed, yet they trust it completely, because experience has taught them that these intuitions are rarely wrong. For years we have asked whether this is a matter of personality or something deeper. Whether the Sigma INFJ is simply an introvert with strong boundaries, or whether their mind operates according to a different architecture altogether. The question that haunts both the Sigma INFJ and those who study them is this: are they neurodivergent? Or are they simply wired for a depth that neurotypical frameworks cannot capture? The answer, as with all things Sigma INFJ, resides in paradox. They are not easily diagnosed because they do not easily fit. They are not obviously neurodivergent because their challenges manifest as strengths, their differences as gifts, and their struggles as the very texture of their genius. Jung wrote that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, yet for the Sigma INFJ, the challenge lies in recognizing that who they are may not conform to the categories we use to understand the human mind. They exist in the space between definitions, and it is precisely this in-between existence that makes them so difficult to name. The Sigma INFJ processes the world through layers. Where others see a conversation, they perceive subtext, intention, historical patterns, emotional undercurrents, and future implications all at once. This is not overthinking, in the neurotypical sense. It is a form of cognitive architecture that functions like a cathedral of perception, with vaulted chambers where meaning echoes and multiplies. The neurotypical mind tends to process sequentially, moving from stimulus to response with relatively linear efficiency. The Sigma INFJ mind, however, operates more like a web, where every input touches 1,000 threads simultaneously. When they hear a sentence, they do not simply decode its literal meaning. They perceive the tone, the speaker's history, the context of the relationship, the unspoken fears beneath the words, and the trajectory of where this conversation might lead. This is pattern recognition taken to an extreme, a form of cognitive synthesis that resembles what we see in certain neurodivergent profiles, particularly those associated with autism and ADHD. Yet the Sigma INFJ does not always struggle with executive function in the way ADHD presents, nor do they necessarily experience sensory overwhelm in the stereotypical autistic manner. Instead, their neurodivergence, if we can call it that, manifests as an almost unbearable sensitivity to meaning itself. They are flooded not by sound or light, but by implication, by the weight of what is unsaid, by the future consequences of present actions. This is the burden of depth. Consider the phenomenon of masking, a behavior long associated with autistic individuals who learn to mimic neurotypical social performance to survive in a world not designed for them. The Sigma INFJ masters this art without necessarily identifying as autistic. They learn early that their natural mode of being, contemplative, intense, pattern-obsessed and uninterested in small talk, alienates others. So they develop a persona. Not a false self exactly, but a functional self, a version of themselves that can navigate social spaces without triggering discomfort or misunderstanding. They become fluent in neurotypical performance, while remaining fundamentally other. This duality exhausts them. After social interaction, they do not simply feel tired. They feel as though they have been translating between languages all day, holding two realities in mind simultaneously, theirs and everyone else's. This is why solitude is not a preference, but a necessity. It is the space where they can stop translating, where they can exist in their native cognitive language, without the constant labor of code switching. Nietzsche spoke of the hermit who goes into solitude, not to escape humanity, but to digest it, and this captures the Sigma INFJ perfectly. They retreat not from hostility to people, but from the sheer energetic cost of being misunderstood. The question then becomes, is this masking behavior evidence of neurodivergence? Or is it simply what happens when a deeply complex mind tries to function in a culture that values speed over depth, surface over substance, and conformity over authenticity? Perhaps the answer is both. Perhaps neurodivergence is not a fixed category but a spectrum of cognitive differences, and the Sigma INFJ occupies a space on that spectrum that has not yet been fully mapped. They do not fit the diagnostic criteria for autism because they possess strong intuitive empathy. They do not fit ADHD because they can hyperfocus with monastic discipline. They do not fit typical depression or anxiety profiles because their emotional intensity is not pathology, but perception. Yet they share enough traits with these conditions: sensory sensitivity, social exhaustion, executive function challenges in chaotic environments, intense inner worlds, and difficulty with superficiality, that to dismiss the possibility of neurodivergence feels like an oversight. The Sigma INFJ lives in a state of perpetual pattern recognition that borders on the prophetic. They sense shifts in relationships before others notice tension. They predict outcomes with uncanny accuracy, not through logic but through synthesis, drawing connections across seemingly unrelated domains. This cognitive style resembles what psychologists call lateral thinking, the ability to make non-obvious connections, but in the Sigma INFJ, it operates constantly, involuntarily, like a background process that never shuts down. It is both their superpower and their curse. They cannot turn it off. They cannot unsee the patterns. And this relentless perception exhausts them in ways that neurotypical minds rarely experience. The Sigma INFJ relationship with routine reveals another dimension of their possible neurodivergence. They crave structure, yet resist rigidity. They need predictability to function optimally, yet they rebel against systems that feel arbitrary or soul-crushing. This paradox mirrors the experience of many neurodivergent individuals who require routine to manage overwhelm, but cannot tolerate routine that lacks meaning. For the Sigma INFJ, routine must serve depth. Morning rituals, solitary walks, and dedicated creative time are not habits but anchors, ways of maintaining equilibrium in a world that constantly threatens to pull them into shallow urgency. When these routines are disrupted, the Sigma INFJ does not merely feel inconvenienced, They feel destabilized, as though the scaffolding holding their inner architecture together has been removed. This dependence on self-created structure suggests a nervous system that requires more regulation than the average person, a hallmark of neurodivergent functioning. Yet unlike many with ADHD, the Sigma INFJ is often highly disciplined, capable of sustaining focus for hours when engaged with meaningful work. Their challenge is not attention deficit, but attention selectivity. They cannot force themselves to care about what feels meaningless, and in a world structured around meaningless tasks, this becomes a significant obstacle. Jung's concept of individuation, the process of becoming one's true self, offers a framework for understanding the Sigma INFJ journey that transcends the neurodivergent versus neurotypical binary. Jung suggested that most people live according to the collective unconscious, shaped by cultural norms and social expectations. In contrast, the individuated person differentiates themselves, integrating their shadow, confronting their deeper nature, and living authentically. The Sigma INFJ appears to undergo individuation whether they choose it or not. Their wiring compels them toward authenticity because inauthenticity causes them physical and emotional pain. They cannot maintain a false self without profound internal conflict. This is not moral superiority. It is neurological reality. Their system rejects incongruence the way a body rejects a foreign organ. This suggests that what we call Sigma INFJ might be less a personality type and more a neurological configuration oriented toward depth, meaning, and authentic self-expression, at the expense of social ease and conventional success. The sensory world presents its own complexities for the Sigma INFJ. While they may not experience the classic sensory overwhelm of autism, bright lights, loud sounds, rough textures, they often report a more subtle sensory sensitivity, an intolerance for aesthetic chaos, emotional clutter, or energetic dissonance. Even if the argument has ended, walking into a room where people have been arguing, the Sigma INFJ feels the residue. Spending time with someone who is inwardly turbulent but outwardly calm, the Sigma INFJ absorbs the hidden distress. This is sometimes called being an empath, but it may be more accurately described as having a nervous system with exceptionally permeable boundaries, one that picks up information others filter out. Neuroscience is beginning to explore the concept of sensory processing sensitivity, a trait characterized by deeper cognitive processing, heightened emotional reactivity, sensitivity to subtleties, and overwhelm in overstimulating environments. This trait, identified by researcher Elaine Aron, appears in roughly 20% of the population, and overlaps significantly with both introversion and certain neurodivergent profiles. The Sigma INFJ often scores high on measures of sensory processing sensitivity, suggesting their depth is not purely psychological, but physiological, rooted in how their nervous system processes stimuli. They are not choosing to be overwhelmed by inauthenticity or shallow conversation. Their system is genuinely registering these experiences as aversive, the way another person might recoil from physical pain. This reframes what might be dismissed as a social preference or personality quirk as something more fundamental, a difference in nervous system functioning that shapes every aspect of their life. The lone wolf archetype that defines the Sigma INFJ is not rebellion or misanthropy, but a survival strategy. They have learned through painful experience that most social environments are not designed for their depth, that expressing their true perceptions alienates others, and that their natural pace, slow, contemplative, meaning-focused, does not match the cultural tempo. So they withdraw not from people but from contexts where they must constantly diminish themselves to fit. This withdrawal is often misinterpreted as aloofness or superiority, but it is neither. It is self-preservation. The Sigma INFJ knows that to maintain their integrity, they must carefully curate their social world, spending time only with those who can meet them at their depth, who will not punish them for seeing too much, feeling too much, thinking too much. This selectivity is exhausting to explain, and often misunderstood, so they stop explaining. They simply become the lone wolf, the wanderer at the edge of the village, present, but apart. What makes the Sigma INFJ question of neurodivergence so compelling is that it challenges our definitions of both personality and neurological difference. If the Sigma INFJ is neurodivergent, what does that mean for how we understand INFJ as a personality type? Does it suggest that certain personality types are actually neurological configurations? And if the Sigma INFJ is not neurodivergent in the clinical sense, what does it mean that they share so many traits with recognized neurodivergent profiles? Perhaps the most accurate answer is that the Sigma INFJ represents a form of cognitive difference that our current frameworks are not equipped to capture. They are not neurodivergent in the way that requires accommodation or intervention, yet they are not neurotypical in the sense of processing the world in standard ways. They occupy a third space, a category we might call depth-wired, in which their entire system is oriented toward perceiving and creating meaning at levels most people neither access nor desire. This depth wiring brings gifts, profound insight, creative brilliance, moral clarity, and the ability to see what others miss. But it also brings challenges, isolation, exhaustion, the burden of knowing too much, feeling too much, and caring too much, in a world that rewards superficiality and speed. The philosopher Plato wrote of prisoners in a cave, who mistake shadows for reality, while one prisoner escapes, and sees the actual world illuminated by sunlight. The escaped prisoner returns to free the others, but they reject him, preferring the familiar shadows to the overwhelming truth. The Sigma INFJ is that escaped prisoner, not by choice, but by wiring. They have seen beyond the shadows, and they cannot unsee what they know. This makes them prophets without audience, visionaries without validation, and outsiders not because they reject the world, but because the world cannot accommodate their vision. Whether we call this neurodivergence, depth wiring, or simply the Sigma INFJ mind, the reality remains the same. They are different, and that difference is both their burden and their gift. Jung reminded us that the cave we fear to enter holds the treasure we seek, and for the Sigma INFJ, the cave is their own depth. The treasure is the acceptance that they will never be normal, and that this is precisely their power. They are not broken neurotypicals. They are not failed extroverts. They are not personality anomalies in need of correction. They are exactly what they were meant to be, minds wired for depth in an age that worships the shallow, seers in an empire of the blind, wanderers who know that the path less traveled is not a metaphor, but their only possible route. The question is not whether they are neurodivergent, or simply wired for depth. The question is whether they will embrace what they are, cease the exhausting performance of normalcy, and step fully into the archetype they embody, the wise outsider, the truth-teller, the one who sees. This is the Sigma INFJ's true challenge, not to fit in, but to stop trying. So here is the question only you can answer. Will you continue performing the translation, exhausting yourself to fit into spaces that were never built for your depth? Or will you finally claim the archetype you embody, the seer, the pattern reader, the one who knows? If this resonated with you, or if you felt seen in ways you rarely experience, subscribe to this channel. This is where we explore the territories most psychology channels fear to enter, the spaces between diagnosis and gift, between isolation and power, between being misunderstood and being undeniable. Comment below and tell me, do you identify as neurodivergent, or do you simply know you are wired differently? What is the most exhausting part of translating yourself for a world that does not speak your language? Your words matter here. This is a space for depth dwellers, for those who have stopped apologizing for seeing too much. Subscribe, and let us continue mapping the territories others cannot perceive. The lone wolf walks alone, but that does not mean you are unseen.